The classic is back, so prepare yourself for a different kind of movie. A movie that takes you on a journey through time.
Ask me.
Will.
Travel aboard the SS Titanic. Shake hands with Napoleon. Become a personal friend to Robin Hood. You will join us at a real Roman orgy. You'll say hello to ancient Greece and marvel at the size of a young warrior's horn. You will spend an evening with the biggest Homo sapien of all time.
Did you hear something, dear?
No, I don't think so.
Finally, a movie that takes you inside the fabulous world of darkness. Recognize this fellow? Well, you will when he tries to destroy all good in the universe.
Oh, no! I'm a reasonable man.
Former Beatle George Harrison brings together John Cleese, Sean Connery, Shelley Duvall, Katherine Hellman, Michael Palin, David Warner, in a journey more ridiculous than history.
Thank you very much. Very, 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 very much.
Time Bandits.
Awful people.
We're here again. Cinema in Depth Psychology. Got a good win here with the man, the myth, the legend. Nick.
Oh, me.
That would be you.
No. How you doing, sir?
Doing good, doing good.
Good.
What are we talking about? Time Bandits today. Going back into some of the classics of fantasy. So this is a movie I've always enjoyed this ever since I first saw it way back in the day. When it first came out. And the story is bananas. It's great. But I wanted to pick this one to talk about today because I think there's a whole lot actually going on underneath the apparently whimsical surface. Terry Gilliam is a very unique director and writer, and he really, you can always tell when you're watching one of his insane movies. So this is definitely one of them. So the story is pretty straightforward. It's this kid named Kevin who's about, I don't know, 10 or 11. He lives in this world of suburban mediocrity, where his useless parents don't do anything except watch brainless game shows and fret over having the latest kitchen appliances that are better than the Joneses, next door. They're just worried about being upstaged by Mrs. So-and-so next door who has something that's even slightly better. Kevin, on the other hand, is the real heart of the story, of course, because he's really interested in ancient warriors and knights and all that kind of thing, and history. And his parents do not care. They don't encourage him to do anything except be quiet. So, pretty soon, just a few minutes into the movie, he gets swept up into this completely bonkers chase through multiple times. He's in with these 6 little people who have a map of the universe, and the supreme being is chasing him around, who wants it back. They hop through the Napoleonic Wars, through Sherwood Forest, through ancient Mycenae, and even a place called the Time of Legends. While the character named Evil is trying to steal the map from them, and the supreme being is trying to get the map from them. So the map is the MacGuffin that everyone's after, and it kind of drives the plot. And ultimately, they get to the Fortress of Ultimate Darkness, and they have this big showdown between them and Evil, and they don't win, but it doesn't matter because the supreme being shows up and blows up Evil and takes the map back and sends Kevin back to where he was at the beginning of the story. And then there's this really strange ending.
Yeah.
Which we're definitely going to need to talk about, because his parents blow up. And he's just kind of left there wandering around in the wreckage. And that's the end. And that's Terry Gilliam movie for you. So what are your initial thoughts of this movie?
I can see why you like it. I can see why you like it.
I'm not sure how to take that, but okay.
No, but in a good way. I really enjoyed it. And I like you mentioned, I was picking up definitely certain underlying themes that might have a part to play in Gilliam's personal myth, his life. But there's definitely a lot there. And the ending, at first I was like, what? Like, what is the message here? Like, what is going on?
Mm-hmm.
But then I started thinking about it, like, oh, well, there might be something here. But yeah, we can get into it. I really enjoyed it.
All right, so I love this movie. I love how completely bonkers it is. Like, it just anything, and it's amazing that he made this movie on a shoestring budget. A lot of the special effects are, I mean, it's not super amazing or anything like that, but they're serviceable, and it don't really it doesn't pull you out of the story. So that, I mean, they work for what he was going for. So before I get into like a deeper analysis, I think though I do have some critiques of the movie. I've seen it a bunch of times, and I feel like and this is kind of related to some stuff we've been talking about on the channel a lot, about how actually difficult it can be to craft a fantasy story that works. And in this movie, I think it's pretty uneven at places. It's got a kind of a rocky start. Once he goes through the first time portal, it's a little rocky in terms of pacing, and there's some other issues that I'll get into. But once evil shows up, though, it starts to really pick up and get going a lot better. It's almost like just the villain showing up a lot of times can make a big difference, and this really shows you how important that is. Got to have a good villain, right? It's like we talked about with Dune, how the first book is amazing, and the subsequent books you really feel the absence of Baron Harkonnen. He's not really there. He's kind of this. He's sort of there, but not really. Not like he is in the first book, like actually like doing things and really causing problems. And so here you don't really know about the villain until until evil shows up. And of course the actor who plays evil is David Warner, just a fantastic actor. He chews the scenery of pretty much any movie he's in. So, and he definitely does that here. And he strikes the perfect tone of he takes it very seriously as being evil, but also at the same time he's almost kind of winking at the audience, and and all that stuff. So I mean, the premise in general is stupendous. It's great, just bouncing all over time. It's just like, let's just go bananas with this. And so they're bouncing all over the place. They even go into the time of legends where there's giants and all this. But occasionally the movie doesn't quite take this idea seriously and slips into zany madcap Monty Python territory. And I think that actually detracts from what he's doing. Like the whole business about Napoleon complaining about him, people and, being too tall and all that kind of stuff, which kind of leads into that silly idea that Napoleon was short, which he really wasn't. That scene, it kind of grinds everything to a halt almost. And you've got so much momentum going in there, and then they're just like sitting there talking, and he's making these jokes, and it just goes on for a little bit too long. Considering the breakneck pace that we've experienced up to this point, it was a strange choice, I thought, to slow it down so much. And then he falls asleep, and we're almost asleep at this point too. Then they start stealing stuff and run through another portal, and then they wind up in Sherwood Forest, where Michael Palin and Shelley Duvall characters show up with their little goofy skit that has nothing to do with the story whatsoever. But I mean, it's funny. I can't deny that. And Ian Holm plays Napoleon is funny.
He's amazing. He's
He's
amazing.
hilarious.
He's so good.
But it's almost like at that stage, like in fantasies, typically when you go through the magic portal, whatever it is, like imagine Harry Potter, if he winds up in, at the leaky cauldron and, and Diagon Alley, right, which is where really things start to open up for him. But instead of doing that, he goes off and does this random stuff for like 15 minutes. And there's this, weird skit going on. So it just doesn't quite work for me. And the fact that ultimately, I mean, Kevin's a pretty serious character. He really takes these places seriously, and he's very serious himself too. And so he's the straight man, right? He's kind of what we're seeing this through. And then for them to wind up in this place where the merry men are like ripping people's arms off and just punching people to give them money before they get money. I mean, it's funny, but it's like, what the hell? What the hell? It's too crazy. It's gone too bananas for me at that stage, because then I've lost track of isn't it cool that we're traveling through time and we're getting distracted by I'm in a Monty Python skit stuff for 10 minutes. John Cleese shows up and he cracks some funny jokes and does his John Cleese thing. But then they wander off, and then evil shows up, and we're back on the plot again. We're back on the main track, and you can definitely feel the shift there. We're like, okay, now we're moving forward again, because now he wants the map, and they decide that they want to find the most fabulous object in the world, whatever the heck that is, which we never find out what it is. In the meantime, Supreme Being is still chasing after him. So I feel like that those two scenes in particular, the humor undercuts the fantasy, and it's tough to do that. I mean, it's tough to get the right tone in fantasy, and the right amount of humor. And humor is very challenging to do. I forget I think it was Ralph Richardson, actually, the guy that plays the Supreme Being in this movie, who said that death is easy, comedy is hard in acting world. And I think that's very true. But anyway, so like once David Warner shows up, we're off and running, and the rest of the movie stays pretty consistent, I think, in tone, and the tone being that of a fantastical journey through multiple times, which it's got a lighthearted kind of feel to it. It's got some funny elements, but it doesn't veer too much into the bonkers, zany madcap territory from that point on. Interestingly enough, and the problem with it is it removes the audience from the engaging with the plot, because you're like, okay, now I'm just in complete absurdity. Right, so I can't take the story seriously anymore. And fantasy is really critical that you take it seriously, even if it's funny and it's fantastical and all that kind of stuff. So I've done a lot of talking. What are your thoughts so far?
I think I think this might be where Gilliam's, like, again, his personal myth comes in, because I think there's a lot of especially with Michael Palin and Shelley Duvall's, like, you're like, why they're very humorous, like this is kind of funny, but I noticed it's just like they time jump, and it's just like, how, like something's going on there. But I think it's a commentary on the modern relationship, or at least the institution of relationships that kind of Gilliam might have and Palin have kind of thought about. And the Monty Pythonisms is definitely just sprinkled throughout the entirety of this thing. 6 time bandits, 6 members of Monty Python, all that kind of stuff. But
and I think they did that on purpose.
Oh yeah. So I think the sprinkling of allegory into it might detract from it a bit, or at the very least, the kind of the commentary on this critique of institutions. Whereas I think Kevin is really the heart, like in his experience, especially his experience with his parents, and then being swept off into this absolutely absurd, multiple worlds, time jumping everywhere. I think that's really at the heart of it. But I can see why you kind of feel like, all right, some of this comedy is just really pulling away from it.
Right, because the tone of a fun, adventurous romp is very different, even though it seems maybe similar on the surface, but it's very different from the zany madcap that you get with the Monty Python. And in Monty Python skits, I mean, I'm a big fan. I love it. It's hilarious. But you can't, it's completely designed for you to not take anything seriously. It pokes fun at everything. It's just because shoots holes at everything in sight. Whereas at the beginning of Time Bandits, we're asked to really care about Kevin, and we're seeing it through his eyes, which are the eyes of a child who is very imaginative and is clearly way more intelligent than his parents are. And he gets swept up, and he's all of a sudden and he already loves history, and now he gets to travel to those places in history. So all of a sudden you're invested, right? And you're emotionally invested in his story. So then once you get to the part where everything is absurd for 15 minutes, you're like, let's get back to that original thing, and I know it's funny, but it's like, what is this? Why are we doing this? I do think you're right about Gilliam targeting conventions. That's something he does in pretty much most of his movies. I mean, he's clearly doing that here in terms of attacking the suburban, shallowness. And I guess that's a British thing. They because I mentioned Harry Potter, but they do that. She does that there too.
Right.
I mean, Kevin's parents could easily be the Dursleys.
Oh yeah.
Superficial and boneheaded as they are, and completely useless. Like they're everything that is against fantasy. The whole idea and point of fantasy. But yeah, so the critique of the institution of maybe romantic love, it might be there in the sense that Pansy and his boyfriend are showing up, and they're going through the motions, and then inevitably something crashes into them from somewhere, whether it's the kids or it's Randall's gang of little people and all of that kind of thing. So visually just dropping a bomb on that.
Right.
But was it needed? Does it have anything to do with the plot? So it's kind of awkwardly shoved in there. If that's the case, I'm kind of skeptical that it was intended with that level of of sophistication. I don't think it was. I think he just threw it in there because this is Terry Gilliam. He likes to just throw everything but the kitchen sink at the screen. It's his approach, and it works a lot of times, and whatever. So yeah. Okay, so here's a question for you. Was the whole thing a dream?
So I think so. I think at the end he was still dreaming, but it was like this resolution, right? And all right, there's so much in this movie, but
no.
so Sean Connery's Agamemnon showing up again as a firefighter, I thought that was really indicative of this kind of ancestral connection type thing.
Yeah.
The ancestral masculine, and it being a very positive force within the kind of unconscious of Kevin, and the symbolic representation of his parents. They care about their utensils and their kitchen and all that shit so much. And then the last piece of evil, they open it up and it's there, and he's like, don't touch it, and they touch it anyway. I think it was really symbolic of kind of this doing away with not necessarily the parents per se, but the kind of not even the safety of the parents, but doing away with what they represent in terms of how they relate to the world. Right. So yeah, that's how I'm coming at it, because I mean, I know he wakes up and then he's kind of, there's this fire going on. His mother's screaming at him to go back into the house to save the toaster or all the different kind of kitchen things that they have. But I like to think that at the end he was still dreaming.
Yeah, I think that the ending of this is actually perfect. It's absolutely perfect fit for the rest of what happens in the movie. And I remember when I first saw it, I was scratching my head, and I was a kid myself, a teenager. When I saw it, I'm like, okay, oh, that was weird. I did not get it. at all. And so here's where I think maybe the interpretation of Pansy and Michael Palin's character, whatever his name is, being in there, basically taking on the same role as they did in not only in Sherwood Forest but also on the Titanic, makes sense if you consider the entire thing to be a dream. Now I've watched some videos and read some analysis of this movie, and there seem to be two camps. I think you're right, though, which is your position is a little bit different from the other two, right? So on one end, you've got one group that says that yes, the whole thing was a dream, because you can see, and there's visual hints of this. At the end, in the Fortress of Ultimate Darkness, there's giant Legos in the background. There's a huge checkerboard that's in the exact same position that it is in Kevin's room that you see at the beginning of the movie.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah, that's subtle. If you're not looking in the background, you will miss that. The camera actually lingers on those things that are reflected later in the Fortress of Ultimate Darkness. So this is something you'd have to watch a couple times to pick that up. Of course, there's the picture of the forest that the knight rides into early on. There's another hint at the very beginning when the knight jumps over his bed and runs off into the forest. Then he comes out from under his blanket and he sees a picture of the forest that the knight just ran into. Of course, it's a lot smaller, right? There's a picture of Napoleon in the background of Kevin's room. If you carefully notice that. Of course, then you've got Sean Connery's character showing up at the end. Apparently that was Sean Connery's idea. He built a pretty good rapport with Kevin and helped him with some of the tougher scenes. The young man that played Kevin is a guy named Craig Warnock, and he had never played in anything before and never played anything after. It was his one role, apparently, in movies anyway. I think he may have done some things on the stage, but Gilliam I think he just happened to chance meet him, and he just really liked his everything about him. Like, he just liked how he seemed very intelligent and reserved and quiet, and he figured that was a perfect character. And it does work. He does work great. Okay, so that's the team that says, yes, it's a dream. And then there's the other team that says, okay, but that he has the pictures of ancient Greece and Randall's gang. He has pictures of the map, and evil actually blows his parents up at the end, right? But the question of whether or not it's a dream depends on whether you think he actually woke up or not, right? And so what you're saying is that he never wakes up. The ending is still inside the dream. It's like Inception, right? Are they still dreaming or not? And I like that answer too. I think you could take it a number of different ways. But I think the ending, the point of the story still comes through, in that the parents really needed to die because they were the biggest problem.
Yeah.
The whole movie. And the movie is about the importance of imagination, which is why it's so important to talk about on this channel. And how the reality of the psyche, as the Jungians like to say, then that ending has to have, they had to go. Right? And it's not like we're invested in them anyway. At one point, I think Agamemnon says, well, don't you want to go back home to your parents? I don't care if I ever go back. Right. It's like, damn. But then you can see why, right? Because it's completely useless. Yeah. They're so useless.
Well, he has in so I took the photos as being almost like the dream ego's ability to remember and recall what happened throughout the experience, and then taking that into waking life and saying, okay, no, there was some level of resolution here, like the ego listening to the unconscious and having that memory, those photos. But the parents, there's just so much in terms of Kevin's interaction with Agamemnon and Sean Connery's characters in terms of they being like this positive kind of parental force, right, within him, specifically in terms of like his relationship with his father. And I think there's a lot of, and I've kind of investigated certain videos critiquing and talking about all these kind of Easter eggs, but I think a lot of them miss out on the kind of underlying psychological implications of it, and specifically in terms of relationship between father and son throughout this entire, movie.
Yeah.
But yeah, if it is still a dream, right? If that's what they were going for through the end, I feel like it really makes sense in terms of the photos, in terms of the firemen showing up, and in terms of that kind of parental complex, in terms of relating, just completely explodes. But it does pan out at the end. It pans out, and I think that's really interesting too.
Yeah. Does that mean that, is he suggesting that the implication spreads out throughout the whole world?
Yeah.
And at least in terms of like the subjective world of Kevin, who, we're seeing the story through his eyes. It's expansion of his horizons. I don't know. What's funny is that nobody notices that his parents just blew up. It just boom. Okay.
Yeah.
And then the firefighters like, hey, see you later.
Yeah.
Your house is on fire. You got nowhere to go.
Yeah, that's right.
All right. Good luck with that.
Kid just standing there by himself. He gives him a wink and then drives off. He's like, Mom, Dad,
where you at?
What? Yeah.
Yeah. So it's kind of like the terror and the exhilaration of the freedom that he now has, that the walls have been blown off. I mean, his house literally burns up. So it's a complete destruction of the superficial suburban world that he was initially in. And there's a comment too on the consumerism. Of course, Gilliam, I think that's a common thread, as his rage against, superficial consumer society. That's definitely there in Brazil.
Oh
yeah. That movie's manic. This one's a little more constrained, which is hard, it's hard to believe considering we're bouncing around into the time of legends and giants.
Right. Yeah.
But it's not quite as breakneck pace. But so and his parents are running back in there to save the toaster, right? They don't even notice whether or not their son died in the fire, right? It's Sean Connery, the firefighting Agamemnon, who saves him. Interesting. Saves him from the fire, right? So the historical figure, if you want to connect the dots here, you can say, as if this were a dream, how would we interpret that? I would say, isn't it interesting that the character from ancient history, who is a king, but more importantly, I think, spent time with him, talked to him, said, I'm going to mentor you into being a king after I'm gone. You're going to take over the throne and all that. And he's the one who saves him from the burning household. So as if to say, his imagination is the only thing that's going to save him from this death by suburban consumerism. Sitting around on plastic furniture, watching your money or your life,
Yeah. An old couple, and the old man gets drowned by custard, right? I mean, like,
it's like crazy.
It's absolutely nuts. But I think you're absolutely right in terms of like this. He's fascinated with history. Kevin's fascinated with history. He's fascinated with these kind of very animating forces in his life, and his parents are just enthralled and engulfed in what I think Gilliam was metaphorically suggesting is evil, right? Is these tools of distraction, and just Kevin at that point just becomes a thing for them. Just like, all right, did you eat? You need to eat, and then you need to make sure you digest it, and then you can go to bed. No noise, no being a child, like none of that.
Yeah, no play, none of that.
Yeah.
It's all firmly contained in his little chaotic room of toys. That's a good point. That's a good point too. And then the depiction of evil too, that's interesting. It's not, I mean, evil doesn't really do anything except, he's not considerably, he doesn't do anything that we typically think of as evil. Like, he's not trying to kill people or sadistically torture people or anything. No, he wants the map so that he can inundate the world with technological wonders. Right? So, I mean, I love the line where he says, we're in the hands of a complete incompetent. And nipples for men, slugs, right? I wouldn't have started with all of that crap. I would have started with lasers, 8 o'clock, day one, bam. Sorry. His part where he's blowing up his minions. That's great. Right, teetering on the edge of that zany madcap again, but it works.
Yeah.
I like it
Well,
more.
in the dream of a child, you know, it might be that kind of that comedic nature, right? I mean, it very well might be that, you know, this representation of evil, you know, for children, especially if they're viewing stuff, you know, evil is represented in a lot of literature, of course, and a lot of like just fiction, TV, and movies. And usually they're kind of zany, weird characters.
Yeah.
They're not like, it's not like you're dealing with Saruman or Sauron, or you're dealing with, you know, well, Darth Vader, you know, but it's very different, you know. But I wanted to ask you, what were your thoughts on the Time Bandits themselves?
Yeah. Oh, that's a great question. So like the first question that emerges when you start thinking about them is, why are they all depicted by short actors? Why did they choose that, right? Why did Gilliam decide to cast famous, some of them quite famous short actors like Jack Purvis and Kenny Baker and all these guys? Okay, so number one, they're all amazing, right? They're so good. But again, that doesn't tell us why did he choose those characters. Now, I have my own ideas, but I wanted to get your thoughts on that first.
Well, in terms of how Kevin relates to them, it almost seems like, you know, maybe the unconscious is providing him with these friends and almost like a new family of sorts in terms of his ability to interact with them. And he feels like whatever message they have to convey are on his level to a certain degree.
Yeah.
But yeah, I got Hobbit vibes, kind of, maybe, you know, at the beginning.
Well, in the sense that everything else is larger than life to someone who's very small, like a child. But these guys are, I think they chose them just visually because it puts them on his level and he becomes their equal. In fact, at one point, one of them says, yeah, maybe we should listen to him. Yeah, he's taller than us. Okay, so that's one piece of the puzzle, is that they're all idiots except for Randall, who's marginally an idiot, right? He's the smartest of the idiots.
Right.
You know, and they're greedy and they're selfish and, you know, comically so. They don't seem to be much of a threat. They're also incompetent. You know, at one point they rob Napoleon and they wind up in Sherwood Forest, and then it comes out that that was actually their first and only robbery. Right? Well, we're international criminals. You know? Well, we're going to be.
Yeah,
we're
right.
to be. So I think the only thing you stole is the map from God. So you stole it from him. Oh, no. Well, real sort of. That's great. You know, it's a contrast to him because, again, he's serious. He's interested in something meaningful. You know, he's his happiest when he's with Agamemnon, and he thinks that, you know, and at that point, I mean, he's found his home, really.
Yeah.
And then they become antagonists because they're trying to, again, sweep him up on this ludicrous quest to find the most fabulous object of the world, which he couldn't care less about. So in a way, they're kind of connected to evil, which is depicted as greed and, you know, shallow consumerism. That's the evil in this movie. And the fact that the parents are there, that Randall's gang are that, and of course evil is that. And there's little chunks of evil. I think it's interesting that Kevin's the smartest character in the whole movie, honestly. So, and that's saying something too about the movie itself, right? It's saying that the childlike attitude of wonder and awe and joy of exploration is the protagonist. And the antagonist of all the forces arrayed against Kevin are ones of greed, of superficiality, of shallowness, and, you know, consumerism. And you know, so when he's there with Agamemnon, he's happy, and then they show up and they grab him. I'm not sure exactly why they bothered to go back in, to that time to sweep him away, but that time he's angry at them for doing that. It's funny that they did that.
Well, it's almost like being in a dream that you don't want to leave, and then something pulls you out, right? And as you're talking, I'm like, yeah, they're kind of like these little tricksterish characters that are just, simultaneously on this adventure with Kevin, but also like pulling him towards this this resolution, right, at the end, right, and eventually getting him to that point.
Well, and in fairy tales, a classic Jungian interpretation of fairy tales considers to be like dwarves and small creatures, that trickstery characters, fairy creatures, the leprechauns and brownies and all that stuff. Those are all classically, you at least want to think about, well, are they instinctive forces that are, like you say, the tricksterish forces? They're stirring things up. They're there to just stir the pot, right? To protect you from stagnation. And so they can seem like an enemy and an ally at the same time. That's why they have this curious antimonial character to them, because they're not really there to harm you or really help you. They're just there to stir shit up and see where it goes. It's like chaos and randomness, but not in a negative way, not destruction necessarily, but just let's shift things up and see what happens. So, and that seems to align with how they are in this movie too, because they're the ones that sweep him away on this whole adventure in the first place. And then once he gets to where he really wants to be, they show up again and drag him off to somewhere else. So it's like the adventure's not over yet.
Yeah.
You still haven't gotten to the big lesson here,
right?
Which is to the ultimate showdown between good and evil. Good, as depicted by Ralph Richardson playing the Supreme Being, is like, you're very untidy. Sign here, please.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, and but it does raise some interesting questions, like why does evil have to exist? Which he doesn't, Gilliam doesn't answer that question. He has God sort of toss it off as, well, I think it has something to do with free will. Now let's get on with this,
Right.
It's like it's an afterthought.
Yeah.
Which works, I think, pretty well. If he had given a definitive answer, it would come across as preachy.
Yeah.
But this leaves it more ambiguous. Just kind of recognizing the fact that we really don't know why evil needs to exist. I think the argument of the movie is that it just sort of happens, and we got to deal with it. It's not like it. Well, but at the same time, though, he deliberately created evil and said, I think it turned out rather well.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting. So they all have, like, at the end, these pieces of evil. And I mean, the time bandits, they touch it and they don't explode, right?
That's right.
Yeah, I think the commentary around it is very, like, it's this stagnation, the stasis of, and especially with the parents, the stasis and lack of, like, actually proper relationship, like relating. The Titanic is a ship that crashes into an iceberg. Evil's the one that's kind of creating this whole situation.
Yeah.
And then, Palin and Duvall's, like, characters just go down with the ship. Their relationship goes down with the ship, like, it's interesting. And that's in and of itself a false front. It's a facade for actual, like, relating. So I wonder to what degree at that point evil is he's commenting on, like, it being this, it just keeps you in the same place. It's this perfection.
Yeah. Stagnation, just overly comfortable. Just sit in my bubble because it's where it's safe, that kind of stuff. Because that's what they're doing. That's what his parents are basically doing. And all that does is lead them to this idle pursuits and superficiality, and they're missing their own son's development and the joy that you could get out of that.
Yeah.
Because it's obsessed with material gains. But then the argument of the movie is that actually winds up destroying itself in the end. It was the evil chunks, it is implied, that started the fire. And of course, when his parents touch it, boom, they blow up.
Yeah.
So it, maybe it just can't last.
Right.
Sooner or later, something will stir it up. But like you say, the Time Bandits themselves aren't straightforward villains. They're not necessarily malicious. They're just kind of goofy and greedy, and they're endearing because they're funny.
Yeah.
And but there was a great scene there in right around in the middle when Evil's spying on them with his cauldron, and Kevin starts talking, and he said, "Who's that one? I don't know him. He's stronger than the rest." I thought it was a neat way to highlight his role in the story, which is, I think, to show that even though he's a kid and these other goofballs that have presumably been around since the dawn of time, he's stronger than they are.
Right.
Yeah, that was cool. So what do you think? What is this movie really about then? What do you think? I'm not sure I've nailed it down.
Yeah, I think there's a lot there, but I think it really, like what we've been talking about, it's the kind of Kevin's own ability to relate to himself when the external world isn't relating to him. And I mean, it's interesting. At the beginning, he has this experience with the night, and then the next night, he's like, honestly, I think the entirety, that first night when he fell asleep, he was still asleep.
Yeah.
I think he's in the dream. He goes back and he's like, okay, this was amazing. Like, this is great. And he grabs a Polaroid and he wants to take pictures. And I really think it's symbolically representing the ego's ability to experience, or the dream ego to experience dreams, and dreams to the extent where they do have symbolic representation of certain resolutions in life, and connecting to those deeper parts of ourselves that are healthy and want us to be healthy and want us to kind of move on. But he is still a kid, right? He is still a kid, and maybe at that point when his parents do explode and when he eventually does wake up, it is, all right, I'm here, mom and dad are mom and dad. And even bad parents are, you still have parents.
Right.
Maybe it's like, well, I just know I'm not going to relate like that.
Yeah.
I just know. And that kind of, that really, it's engaging for him to have gone through this experience, because it shows him that he can stand on his own 2 feet, even though he's a child. But that will eventually lead him into adulthood and say, okay, I'm gonna relate like I want to.
Right.
Which is very dynamic. It's not static.
Right. You mentioned the pan out at the end, but that is bookended by the way that the movie starts, which is it starts with the map, and then it does a long zeroing in on Kevin's household. So it's like the map is even larger than the universe, and so you start with the map, and then you shrink down to just the universe, and then you shrink all the way down to Kevin's little tiny place. And so at the end of the movie, though, we reverse that process. So it's like it's saying that at the beginning we're locked into this little tiny corner of the universe, and he's trapped there. He's a prisoner. That's another thing about fantasy, is that very common theme underlying most fantasy is that of imprisonment versus freedom, emotional and mental freedom. And a lot of times a fantasy story will travel from the beginning, your main character is a prisoner of some kind, perhaps not a literal one, but a metaphorical one, an emotional one, a social one, etc. And through their journey, they wind up in a place of freedom. And that's exactly what happens here. And then the pan out is to kind of show us that, rather than tell us. That's showing us now his universe is expanded, and he's all the way out to the map again, right? Which is everything and beyond the universe, which he has a picture of, by the way. And they've already established in the movie that you can use a picture of the map to figure out where stuff is if you just get out a little magnifying glass. They do that while they're trapped in the fortress of ultimate darkness.
Yeah,
right? Remember
right.
that? Yeah, it's like there's a portal right below us, So it's established that he could now theoretically go anywhere he wanted to. He could go back to Mycenae if he wanted to, or whatever. But he had to break free of the constraints of the suburban nightmare that he was living in. This pallid, lifeless, sort of empty, not all particularly all that unpleasant, but not living. Just sort of meaningless, empty existence. But at the end, all that stuff burns away or blows up. And now he's completely free. So that's why I tend to think of this as soon as the time bandits show up, he's in the dream. And then when he wakes up when the house is on fire, but that Gilliam's choices of intercalating the so-called dream world with the so-called real world are done in such a way to show that the boundary is actually not as rigid as we think it is, right? Which I often talk about that in fantasy, that if you keep the boundary rigid, that's how we get trapped in ego fantasies and we don't live. But breaking open that boundary helps us to use the imagination for what it was originally designed to do, which is to get us out there.
Yeah.
So a couple of questions here. We'll wrap up with a few questions. What do you think the most fabulous object in the world is? We never see it.
Yeah.
But what's the point, or what is up with that? I think it works perfectly, but
I don't think there is one.
No,
I don't think there is one. That's the whole point. There is no one most fabulous object in the world, right? And if it's a commentary on stasis, right, on stagnation and this one, right, just like these kind of false fronts, false relationships, well, maybe not false relationships, but maladaptive relationships, suboptimal relationships, I don't think there is one.
No, I think that's a great metaphor for mindless consumerism. Like, well, there's this thing that's even better, right? It's new and improved.
Right.
And I know that Gilliam hates that kind of stuff because I've seen interviews with him, and he's just a real character. This movie definitely, along with many of his others, is a real harsh criticism of that suburban shallowness. That's Stranger Things is also in that category. It does that too. It's a little more subtle about it. You can say anything you want about Gilliam, but subtle he is not usually.
No. Yeah.
Although there's nuance there, but that's not quite the same thing. Harry Potter, we talked about that. We talked about why Kevin's parents exploding is not much of a tragedy because they were completely garbage human beings anyway. They didn't care about their child. She was more worried about the toaster. If you were half a man, you'd go run in there after the blender. It's like, okay, thanks, Mom.
Christ.
Now, you could make the argument that Kevin doesn't really seem to change or learn anything, because he's pretty much the same as he was at the beginning. But I think that we've kind of uncovered the fact that things do change for him significantly, and that he realizes it's not specifically stated. So maybe this is part of the subtlety that I'm joking about that he doesn't have, that Gilliam does have, which is that he doesn't preach to us about how Kevin is now free to think the way he wants and blah blah blah. No. So the prison he was in, it just blew up.
Yeah.
And there he is now. What's he going to do with it? Who knows?
Right.
It's not the point.
Yeah. Well, he has those photos, and I think the unconscious will do what it does without it. I mean, it's there is going to be resolution there. And he has the memory of it. Memory.
Now, here's a couple of interesting questions, I think, concerning the Supreme Being. So at the end, it seems like the Deus Ex Machina ending seems to fit, but I'm not sure exactly why. Him just showing up and blowing up evil before he decimates them. What do you think's up with that? Why is it ended like that? Why does it seem to work anyway?
Well, I think he's the kind of narrator of the dream. I think he's the one that's like written all this out.
Yeah.
And he's like, all right, yeah, no, this is going to be great. Like, Kevin's going to learn some shit. Like, we're all going to, this is awesome. This is great. and his whole plan was to show up at the end. I think that was really it. And Kevin was asking him, I think at one point Kevin was asking him about like why everybody had to die, like stuff like that. And
might as well ask why there has to exist evil, right?
right, yeah, and yeah, I think the Supreme Being was really he was it's the narrator of the dream in a sense.
Randall says, "Oh, we wouldn't dream of asking you that, sir."
Right.
You mean God? Well, we don't know him that well.
Yeah, right. Oh, that's funny. It's so good.
That's so good. Yeah, that's true. So, I always talk about how fantasy, when it's done really well, is about an encounter with the divine or the mysterious. And in a kind of offhand way, that is what happens here too. He shows up and he realizes that the whole thing was set up from the beginning. I mean, the Supreme Being obviously knew that the Time Bandits stole the map. And he even says that of course I knew you were. I'm not entirely dim. I'm the Supreme Being. And so at the beginning, when he's chasing after them, it's just all an act.
Right.
Yeah, return what you have stolen from me.
Yeah.
And it's all the lights and the mirrors, and he kind of looks vaguely like the Wizard of Oz there.
Yep.
It was probably intentional. But that was all machinations, right? All theatrics. Maybe for Kevin's, benefit. Could be. Yeah. Because we don't really hear much about what they did before they run into Kevin. They didn't steal anything. They were lousy at it. Yeah.
They literally just stole the map and they were allowed to.
Yeah, and he let them do it on purpose just to test out.
Yeah. They thought he was the Supreme Being at the beginning, if I'm not mistaken. They thought he was, which is interesting. That's kind of
true.
Interesting.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that part. That's because he's got the flashlight, and it's like,
right.
Oh, we're sorry, we just got a little happy,
Yeah, right.
Ran off in high spirits. Oh wait a minute, that's not him, So in a way, Kevin is the Supreme Being, of his little universe.
Right.
But not quite. So it's kind of like maybe the self, and the self, as he perceives it, is this sort of, I don't know, he's kind of a fatherly figure, but not really. He's just very distant and, everything's under control, but that doesn't mean you're going to enjoy it.
Right.
All that kind of thing. So I don't know. It's really interesting choices there. And maybe it was just done just for comedic effect. I wouldn't put it past them to do that. But it just seems to fit here anyway.
Yeah.
And because of the fact that it was all organized from the beginning, and now they're like, well, let's go back to the beginning and recreate now that we've learned some things. And well, what about Kevin? Well, he's got to go back and keep fighting on the good fight against evil.
Yeah.
Which is the battle against, consumerism and shallow, emptiness and all that. So what do you think happens to Kevin now?
I think he learned what he needs to learn, and I hope that I hope he grows up to be a creative, life-loving, non-conforming to a certain extent adult.
He has the map.
He has the map.
So
well, at the very least, he's gotten a glimpse of it, right? And he has a photo of it.
He's got a photo of it, which he can use if he wants to. So it becomes a merger between, like, the map itself is a symbol of the great mystery of existence, and he now has it, so he can use it rather than it, being this thing that just causes him to be chasing around and it's a botched job and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. But here it's, I can find a way to travel. We mentally time travel all the time. I mean, even in psychology, they talk about this. In the study of spontaneous thought and imagination, there's quite a bit of scholarly work around this, and they use that term as mental time travel, which is just conjuring up a scenario from the past in your head or even in the future, and what the function of that ability is, and how that ties into all that. So here it's kind of like he's learning how to utilize that well, and the enemy is this stifling society that he lives in, this suburban, middle class culture of conformity, and just make sure you your KitchenAid can turn a block of ice into a 18 course meal in 12 seconds. You know, as long as it's 3 seconds faster than the neighbors,
Right,
you know,
right.
that's all anybody cares about.
So ridiculous. So ridiculous. Do you maybe this is too big of a question to ask at the end of this video, but do you think maybe the actual map is like the blueprint, and the picture of the map represents the spark of it within Kevin to a certain degree?
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I can see that working as a symbolism, type of way of symbolizing that. Okay. Photos in general are kind of our attempts at grasping moments. That's why we use them. I mean, what in the world did we do before they were invented, right? We had to use stories, draw pictures, paint, all that kind of thing.
Yeah.
All right, so there's our analysis of Time Bandits.
It's pretty good.
Yeah,
not bad.
Great,
not bad.
Great classic.
Great movie. Great movie. Well, as always, Dr. Goodwin, thank you for having me. Great conversation. I look forward to seeing you again next week. And then everybody, hope you have a good week.
All right. We'll see you.
Bye.